Hi, Vincent Hall, and welcome to another episode of Anyone Can Draw / Paint and maybe even cook. If you recall last week when I was demonstrating how to paint fur and how to draw fur on an animal, and we were looking at Albrecht Dürer's rabbit, I had started by using tea as a base color to give that sepia tone. One of our residents, Midge Holmes, inspired me to do a lesson on doing a whole painting demonstration based on things you might have around the house to use as pigments. If we think about what watercolor is as a compound word, it's water and color, or pigment. So basically anything that stains water or color could be used as a paint medium. And the materials that you have around the house, maybe some spices, some cabbage, even if you have some red cabbage, red beets, food coloring that you might use for just, coloring icing, things like that. They can all be used to create some interesting pigments that we can then go ahead and do a painting with. I'm going to be demonstrating how to use these different pigments that you have around the house. Guess we can call them natural pigments. And even though the food coloring here might not be natural per se, it does have some colors, and I'm going to be showing you how to use some of these as well. If you don't have these, I know you can order them at the grocery store, have them delivered if you decide you like this topic. And of course, as always, if you want to use your regular paints, if you have watercolors, watercolor pencils, feel free to use that too. What's the subject matter for this week? I was thinking, because it's Memorial Day weekend coming up, that we would focus on some icon of Memorial Day, and that to me is the poppy. I remember as a child being in Scouts, always getting a poppy from the American Legion to wear on my uniform during the Memorial Day parade. And I feel like the poppy is also a beautiful flower in its own right, so it's kind of perfect thing to select for this Memorial Day weekend, and let's get started. One of the benefits of teaching art for 35 years in Fairfax County is I have a plethora of stuff, like little palettes and things like that I used to use for demonstration in class that I had bought, and I kept handy once I retired and brought them home. If you don't have a palette, you can use a paper plate. You could use these little cupcake mixing bowls, so cupcake liners work well. A muffin tin, if you have that, or just maybe some plain old glass jars that you might have around the house, whatever works, plastic cups even, just something to put a little bit of the pigment in. What we're going to be doing is starting by taking some of these spices and just spooning out a very small amount and mixing it with some water, and I'll show you the consistency that you're going to want. We're looking for a consistency that's thicker than your average watercolor paint because the pigments are not going to be as intense with these as they would be with store-bought watercolors. So stay tuned, we're going to start mixing. As you can see here, I've set out a variety of items that we can use. There's different spices. I didn't feel like cooking red cabbage, so I bought some in a jar, but if you have red cabbage and want to cook it down, that works too. Red beet juice is something that stains anything it comes in contact with, but it makes a beautiful color. I've got different spices here: paprika, ground mustard, ground cinnamon. And if you look over here, you can see that I even have some baking soda. And why do I have baking soda? Because if we add that to some of these food colorings, we're going to change the color. It's also going to make this red cabbage juice look a little bit different. It's kind of a science experiment. I almost feel like Bill Nye the Science Guy here. These last two things, Tums. And you might think, well, I might need Tums if I ate all these things. Absolutely. We're not going to eat the Tums, but you can dissolve Tums in water like I have right here, and use this to make a really pretty pastel pigment as well. The key is to use hot water when you're dissolving any of these powdered items. So we're going to start with different spices. So I took the liberty of pouring out some of the spices. To save time, I'm just going to demonstrate with two. I have paprika here and turmeric here, which should make us some pretty nice pigments. The key is to use hot water and to add the water to the powder, not the other way around, or what's going to happen is the powder is just going to suspend on top of the water and you'll have a rather difficult time mixing it. As you can see, I'm using a tiny little, this is about a half teaspoon, old baby spoon that I had sitting in the drawer, but I thought it'd be good for just dropping in small amounts of water. If you have an eyedropper, that works too. And then I'm just gonna use a regular old paintbrush to mix up these colors. And what's nice is you can get these colors really thick. I'm gonna clean that off over here, mix this one up, and just wait till you get the right consistency. Definitely need more water in the paprika. So I will add some more water here, and you'll just have to play around with it till you get the consistency that you really want to work with. If you like thinner, watery palettes, then add more water. And it isn't the cleanest process in the world here, but it should work out. And all I'm gonna do here on some scrap paper is do what's called a test swatch, which is just to show me what these colors look like. So here is my turmeric, and you can see I'm getting a really pretty yellow. Yes, there is gonna be some grain in this, but that can add some interesting textures too, so I don't mind that. I mean, if you really wanted to use cheesecloth or something to get rid of that texture, you can. Oftentimes when this dries, you can just brush these little dots off of the dried paprika or the dried turmeric or whatever spice you're using with a dry paintbrush, and it should be just fine. Here's our paprika, and you can see we're getting some pretty nice shades here, kind of like a rusty brown. These are also buildable. By buildable, I mean that when this dries, we're going to be able to add more colors on top of it and keep building up layers. So I'm gonna let that sit for a minute so I can show you the buildup thing. Oh, got a little spot there on that. And show you some of the other things that we can use. Beet juice. I also took the liberty of opening the can so I can just hopefully pour a little bit of this out. The beet juice and the cabbage juice, say that one 3 times fast, cabbage juice, there we go. That one, these won't have those dots because they're already as smooth. And this is an absolutely beautiful color here. If you can see it, almost a magenta pink. And that's gonna work really well with the poppy that I'm going to start painting. This one here, which is our cooked red cabbage juice. I'm just going to, if you press the spoon down, if you can see here, bring this into the camera, sorry about that. If you can see here, I'm pressing the spoon down, so I'm just getting the juice and not getting hunks of cabbage mixed up into that. If you do, it's no big deal. Your brush will not pick up pieces of cabbage, but this creates a little bit different color red. And again, that's also going to be buildable. We're going to be adding some baking soda to this, and I'm going to show you the difference in the colors with that in a minute. So these are the basics for home cooking things, spices and foods that you might have around the house. If you cook spinach, that'll give you a nice green. Of course, nutmeg and cinnamon, as the name implies, would give you a nutmeg or cinnamon brown. Mustard, ground mustard, will give you a light yellow, whereas the turmeric will give you a darker yellow. The list is pretty much endless of what you can do with those colors. We're going to stop here for a minute, and I'm going to show you what we can do with the food coloring. My first experience with food coloring was when I was a kid and we were painting Easter eggs because we didn't have the pre-made Easter egg dyes, so we would just buy food coloring. I got 2 different kinds. I've got the generic from Safeway, and then of course the McCormick, which we're all familiar with, and it doesn't really matter, they're all the same. What I liked about the generic one from Safeway is it has a larger print version of how to make some really nice colors, and I can show it to you here. I will also print this out and add it at the end of this show so you can see it as a slide. But it tells you how many drops to use to make something else. For instance, here it says Orange Sunset. Use 3 drops of yellow and 1 drop of red. And that way you should be able to get a pretty nice orangey color. If you want to make purple, it says add 6 drops of red and 4 of blue. And then of course you can play around with it from there. But I like that it gives you a little guide. Clearly people use that. I mean, if you're decorating icing, of course. These things stain. So although they're water-based, as we all know, if we ever got any of this on our hands, especially red, if you make a red velvet cake, you look like you made the red velvet cake for a couple of days if it gets in the wrong place. So what we're going to do is just open these, and I'm going to drop them into a little container. This one, so I'll put one in each, and then we can add other drops to make some secondary colors. What we have here are the food colorings in just 4 drops of each. This is our red. This is yellow, which looks anything but yellow when you squeeze it out, but it'll be yellow on our paper. And then we have blue and green. And then I'll just have a couple out to make some extra secondary colors in here. But if I don't wet my brush, if I just keep the brush dry and use the red as it exists, you can see here what a beautiful bright red that we have. By adding water to this, I can start to do a gradient going lighter and lighter and lighter, so I can get a whole myriad of tones based on that one color. If you remember back in the drawing lessons, we were doing the same thing with a pencil, just going dark to light. I'm just rinsing off my brush, and I'll take the yellow and check out to see what that yellow is. And that's a really vibrant yellow too. Again, these are called swatch tests, and it's just so you get a chance to see what the colors. That blue is magnificent. I really love that. That's a very vibrant color, probably my favorite of this whole group right now. And then the green. So if we have these 4 colors, we can pretty much make any color. And if you need to use black, because if we think about the inside of the poppy, there's a little bit of black, taking equal amounts of red and green and mixing them together is going to give you, most of the dark brown, but we can add a little more red to that and get a really nice black. Kind of mix up, there we go. So red and green together will give us this dark neutral black that then we can go back in and use to shade and tone these other colors if we need to get darker versions of them. So you can make tints and tones out of these. Tints are when the colors go lighter, and tones are when the colors go darker or shade. So by adding water, we're going to make this lighter, and by adding red and green together to make this natural black, we can make everything go darker. So now we have some natural pigments with our beet juice, our turmeric, our paprika, and our cabbage. And now we also have our food coloring. The next step is to think about what we're going to paint. And what I was thinking of doing is using a poppy as an idea. I found this picture online. I'm going to use this as a rough reference. This I'm going to make darker. So it looks a little more traditional, like the darker poppy with the dark blackish, dark red inside where the stamen is, and probably make these petals a little bit lighter and maybe not do such a dark background. But I just wanted to find something airy and watercolor-like that would work well for this poppy. At the end of this demonstration, you're going to see a lot of different ideas for how to do a poppy. We could do poppy fields. We could do the traditional one red poppy for Memorial Day. There's poppies in a vase. There's all kinds. So it's whatever you feel like doing. And if you don't want to do a poppy, you can do whatever you want. That's the beauty of a watercolor painting assignment or any kind of art. Make it your own. Before we get into doing the poppy, actually, I wanted to show you what baking soda can do to these different colors. This is gray. This is cabbage juice, which is red. So if I take this cabbage juice here and add a little bit of baking soda to it, the baking soda changes this down into this beautiful neutral gray. Grays are really helpful when we're trying to get a subtle tone or some nice background colors that aren't so perfect. If I take the baking soda and add it to the beet juice, mix this up here, it's going to tone down my beet juice into a bit of a darker, almost like a light lavender, well, not lavender, but like a lighter purple color. So it's not as vivid and bright like that. And you can play around with this. Baking soda just changes the whole dynamic of these colors and also changes the viscosity or the thickness of it too. So you have some extra baking soda lying around. What baking soda is doing to the turmeric is making it a much more neutral color. So again, baking soda will neutralize your colors and give it a little more of a subtle tone instead of these bright ones. But my favorite is how that cabbage juice goes from pretty much a bright magenta to a gray just by adding sodium bicarbonate or baking soda. Just thought I'd show you that in case you wanted to try a little experiment. I'm ready to start sketching out my poppy. And for those of you that follow along with the drawing class, you know we're all about basic shapes. So once again, I'm just doing some elongated oval shapes to make these petals. And I'm using a pencil very lightly so that you can at least get to see what the outline is. And I'm looking at that poppy that I showed you earlier as my reference point for an idea. And then there's the stem that comes right about out there. And this is that inside that's going to go darker. I'll make that a little bit smaller. So this is just my rough outline. There's really not that much to it. I'm using a pencil very lightly so that hopefully we won't see too much of that when we paint over it. If we do, lines are fine. They add a little interest. If you don't like it, you can always lightly erase out so it's the bare minimum of what you want. Or if you're so inclined, this is one of my favorite things. It's a medium wash graphite pencil, which is actually a water-soluble graphite pencil. So this graphite here will dissolve as the water hits it. And then what I'm going to do, I decided I'm going to start by using the pigment from the food coloring. And I'm just going to start by laying these colors in and just roughing out the areas that I want to have as the bright red, and the areas that I just want to have as maybe a little bit lighter by adding more water to it. We'll go in here, get this one a little bit lighter on this side. And you can use whatever paper or surface you want. I'm actually using a canvas board for this because these pigments are so strong that they will stain the canvas board really nicely. But if you have regular drawing paper at home, just want to try it with the plain old printing paper we've been talking about, that is absolutely fine too. And you can see I'm not doing the whole petal. I'm doing the insides because as the petal comes towards the middle of the flower, it's darker. And then we're going to work it out, getting it lighter later on. And I'm going to switch over to some of that beet juice we were talking about earlier because I really do like the pigments in that as well. And leave some areas white because in watercolor painting, we want to leave some space or some air. You can see how these are really pretty and really cheap. This was $3 for the whole set. I don't think you can find a watercolor set that inexpensively, and you can really make some nice tones with these food dyes. Okay, I'm gonna carefully bring over my beet juice because these things spill, and I'm going to add in some pinks. This will give us a little bit of a different tone. And you can mix them. So you can use these beet juice colors, spice colors, whatever you're using over the food dye if you have it. That all works. I'm just trying to give us a little bit of tone. So it might look a little sloppy right now because we're going to add some definition later on with some opposite colors, but I'm just trying to give myself some space here just to define these petals before this totally dries. And just gonna dab this in. This is a wet brush approach, and I'll just kind of lightly draw in the outline of the shape here. You can see here how my graphite pencil is starting to dissolve a little bit, and I kind of like some of those edges. I'm just being a little loose with this. Kind of rough that in here. And then, just to keep things real, we'll take the green and do the stem. So we can just kind of get that stem going in there too. I'm not doing a leaf on this. I'm just going to get the stem. While I have that black mixed up, I'm taking red. Move this down a bit. Taking some red and some of the blue, the green. At least you can't tell the difference until you actually look at them. Maybe a little more red. And you can see that I do have a dark neutral black tone that I'm able to lay in here and really get the depth of the inside of this poppy. What I'm going to do now is let this dry a little bit, and we're going to work back in some detail. All right, This had a chance to dry, so now I'm able to go back in and add some definition. You can use the same brush. I'm going to switch to a smaller brush just so we can see where some of these little petals end. And I'm going back in and just using my straight red with maybe just a touch of the green just to give it a darker red. So if you add more red and less green, you can get a darker red. We'll try it on our swatch sheet first, and there we have a nice dark red that I can use to define some of these petals a little bit better, just to help show. I want to keep this loose. So for those of you that are into photorealism, this is not going to be that kind of a painting, but it is going to hopefully resemble a flower somehow. And if people looked at it, they'd get the idea that maybe it's a poppy. Again, I'm just chasing these around, letting these be loose too. The idea is to keep the watercolor a little more free. Actually, there was a video I used to show my high school students. They thought it was more punishment. It was a very old school video called Watercolors Bold and Free. And the majority of it involved watching the gentleman pour water into a container so that he was making his own paint. And that could be a little taxing. So I would never do that to any of you, but I'm just letting you know that video exists out there somewhere if you ever want to try to find it. All right, so I've got some different tones here. If you don't like something or you want to change it, just take a little bit of a paper towel and kind of blot into it, because I'm going to lighten some of this area here. And you can see I can remove. This is called the reductive method, where I'm removing the paint that I put in to try to get something else if I didn't like what that looked like there. So I am just going to take another layer of red and build this up here now that I have a sense of where that petal is. And maybe, let's see, one more right in here just to give that a little more depth. And again, I'm going to let this sit here and dry a little bit more while I go around the edges. Just kind of help this little petal along a little bit. I mean, you can just kind of wing where you want this to go. The key is don't let any color just sit. Now you can see this black turned into more of a darker green. I'm going to add red over that, but I'm going to use that really thin here and there to kind of define some of my petals, because I can help bring this flower along a little bit more. Again, one of my painting professor's adages of always use a color somewhere else if you used it once can work with this too. We can even give this a little bit of an interesting outline coming around here. And I am going to go into the background just a little bit. I don't want my background to be too busy at all on this. But on the other hand, I want to try to preserve the idea of a poppy somehow here. And by taking this color that I just used lightly, this kind of almost neutral grayish color, I'm just kind of fill here, in here and there, just giving it a little bit of a tone in the background so that it's not so stark white. You're welcome to do white. You're welcome to dissolve edges out like this, like what I'm going to do here, and bring this back down into this painting a little bit more. I'm not going to fill the whole painting up with a background, but I'm just giving the illusion of space. I'm even going to take this gray that we made with the baking soda and the cabbage juice and just kind of fill this in a little bit, just to, I don't know, add a little more depth, I guess, is where we're headed here with this. So just kind of intuitively streaking around, and not too much, just a little bit. And I'm going to take a little bit of red into this green and make it more of a black, because there was just a little bit too much green. Now you do get to a point, those of you that are my acrylic painters, you know what this drill is. You get to the point where the paint starts to do something with itself while you're trying to get it to dry. And you can see here it's actually picking up itself rather than laying in a tone. But I like that. It gives it that kind of the look of the stamen coming into the flower here, the poppy. So I'm going to let that dry. And when we come back from this drying, I think we'll be just about done. I'm going to add my last layer of tone, and then we'll see what we have. While I was waiting for this to dry, I took my brush and just kind of cleaned it off here on the bottom of the canvas. I'll hold this up so you can see. I really like just kind of using some of those similar colors to give an illusion of some definition. If you find you get too much, you can always just take some water in here, scrub it off, take a clean part of a paper towel and wipe it out. So you can remove this paint before it gets too bad. It's really not paint, it's food dye. Interestingly, it doesn't come off your hand so good, but it will come off of the canvas board. If you find that an area is too heavy, like right in here, I just think I want to take a little bit out. So I'm actually painting with a paper towel and I'm streaking this through just to lighten up the background, but to give it a little bit of color. Because if we just had nothing, this flower would look like it's sort of floating in space. I was also experimenting with the Safeway version of the food dye and found that their red is much more vibrant. Big difference. So here's to generic store brand. It really does work better than that McCormick one, which was starting to dry a little bit brown. So if I wanted to get this nice poppy red, I'm just going to go back in and lay in some of this other version. It's amazing how different brands can change, and that works for all kinds of paints too. It never ceases to amaze me how one brand of a cadmium red, a basic red, will look completely different than another brand. So whatever you decide you like the best, of course, go with that. But I definitely found I prefer this Safeway brand to the McCormick brand. So I specifically left some areas here a little flat because I wanted to show you one last trick. You can use your brush as an eraser. If you get the brush wet with some clean water, and it has to be a stiffer brush. So if you have a stiffer brush, that works. If you don't have a brush at all, use a Q-tip. We've used Q-tips in the past. And you can see here, I'm just removing a little bit of that paint, and I can get some really nice definition of where I want my petals to be lighter on this poppy, or to bring in just a little bit of a lighter tone here. And again, I'm just cleaning off the brush as I go along and using the reductive method, which is removing paint, as a painting technique in and of itself. And I'm going to bring that back in. And then I can also use this black that I have for the middle and pull it through to create a little bit of a shadow. So I can help make sure that one petal looks like it's a little bit more in front of the other by adding a shadow. Another rule of thumb is where you have a highest highlight, you usually have a shadow next to it of some sort. And I can take my thin little brush here and create more definition on that one petal here, kind of come around here where we lost some. Maybe fill that in just a little bit. And really just kind of at this point, you're just doing intuitively what works best for you. Again, I wanted to keep this style loose. I didn't want to make it too defined. The idea was to do a very expressive version of a poppy for Memorial Day. If you like working more realistically, feel free. The examples following this video are going to give you some other ideas as well. So there you have it, Vincent Hall. I think I'm pretty much finished. Here's my poppy, for better or worse. I think I tried to keep true to my idea of an expressive poppy, change the colors a little bit, but all in all, that's pretty much done. Remember, you want to add some white, leave some white space, not add it, leave it, so that your white paper or canvas looks a little more unified with your finished result. I hope you've enjoyed this session on drawing, painting, because really drawing and painting are very similar. It's just a matter of if you're using a pencil or a brush. Either way, it's expressive, and that's what's the most important thing. Vincent Hall has some excellent floral painters. So if you run into Mary Ruth Wayne, Audrey Cole, Susan Berkey, Maureen Kammerer, they all work in different medium, but they do a lot of floral paintings, and I'm sure you would enjoy looking at them. So feel free to ask them when you run into them in the hall, from a safe distance, of course. Anyway, Vincent Hall, I hope you have a wonderful Memorial Day weekend. I look forward to seeing you next week with another episode of Anyone Can Paint, Anyone Can Draw, Anyone Can Express Themselves in Art. Till then, stay safe, be well, and I will see you next week.